All right. Title of my talk tonight. There's sort of two. First one is You Are Called, and the second one is Doubting Schmouting. So You Are Called and Doubting Schmouting, whichever one tickles your fancy. I'm going to start with sort of, sharing a bit of my testimony. Sort of well known, I guess, and because I grew up here, so a lot of people sort of know it. But I guess sort of the point of my testimony tonight that I'll be telling is that my testimony is my parents' testimony. My parents' testimony is their parents' testimony, and that makes it my testimony as well, sort of thing. My dad's dad, so my grandma and grandpa, Jim and Nancy Sinclair. My walk, I guess, starts with them and how they were in the world and had their own family, and through a circumstance, through a series of events, Grandma Nancy, she was witness to, and then Grandpa came to the Lord, and then the whole family came to the Lord, and Dad grew up in the fellowship, and Mum has her own testimony of how she came to the Lord. But I guess the point is that my grandparents coming to the Lord was all part of the plan for me to be standing here today, and the Lord knew that that was the plan for me to be standing here today, for someone to witness to my grandma, so that I can be here today as well. Along my sort of walk, moved to a smaller fellowship when I was about 9 years old, and that has had probably a big impact on my on my walk that I often sort of forget to realise. Sometimes forgetting, where I could be if I'd sort of grown up throughout youngies and sort of my teenage life in a bigger fellowship in Adelaide, whether that would have led me to where I am in my walk, or whether it would have changed things at all. I guess, there can be stages, at least in my walk, where I sort of didn't know if it was best for me to be in a smaller fellowship, whether, maybe moving back to Adelaide, just because, you got friends over there, and I didn't really know if, Ballarat was supposed to be my spot. But after prayer and a lot of different sort of situations occurring, it was very obvious, and still is obvious, that Ballarat is definitely the place for me, and I have a purpose here. And I guess that's sort of where the title of the talk, You Are Called, comes in, is that no matter sort of where we're at in life, the Lord has called you to where you are right now, wherever that be, and you definitely have a purpose wherever you are at the moment. So just to sort of emphasize that point, we'll go to Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah 1. And in verse 5, it says, Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. So, little scripture there, but pretty straight on as to what I was saying. Before we were even formed ourselves as human beings, the Lord knew thee. So he knew us. Before my mum and dad even met and were married and had thoughts of having children, the Lord knew me. Before my grandparents were witness to, the Lord knew me, and he knew my role. That's the same for everyone in this room, because everyone in this room has been called. That's why we're in this room, and he knew what your path was to get here and why you're here in this room. We'll go to a bit of a story to sort of parallel this. We'll go to Judges 6. So we're sort of moving more toward the doubting side of things. So I've sort of just rambled on for a couple of minutes there about how called you are, but like I said, there was stages in my sort of early teens, going into young people's side of things where I didn't know if Ballarat was sort of the place for me. And I guess you could sort of say there was a bit of doubt there. So there's a story here around doubt, and it's a pretty well-known one, but yeah, it's a good one anyway. Judges, I got to get there myself. Judges 6. So a bit of backstory, children of Israel sort of weren't doing the best of stuff, did evil in the sight of the Lord, it says, and they were sort of thrown into the hands of the Midianites for around 7 years. And we've got a story here about the Lord sort of going to deliver them in these circumstances. So in Judges 6, it starts in verse 15, and the Lord's talking to Gideon, and in verse 15, Gideon says, and he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. So, yeah, long story short, Gideon had been asked to deliver the children of Israel out of the hand of the Midianites, and the Lord comes to him. And pretty much immediately at the start of this story, Gideon is sort of doubting whether he should be the one. It's a common, crux in the Bible, you could say. You think of Moses, where he said he was sort of slow of tongue. But here, Gideon is sort of saying, my family, is poor. We're very poor, and within that family, I'm the least. So why me? And I guess, we could have that side of things as well. If we feel like we have doubt in the role in our fellowship at the moment, or where we're at in life, we could sort of think, well, I'm not the best at this, and this, and this, and I'm the worst at this, so I've got nothing. Why am I here? Why is this sort of happening to me? Am I meant to be here? Sort of thing. And we'll see in verse 36, skip down a bit into the story, we see that Gideon sort of starts to ask for a bit more clarity. So even in verse 16, God sort of said, I will be with you. But Gideon's now asking for something a bit more. So in verse 36, Gideon said unto God, If thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou had said, behold, I will put out a fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then I shall know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou had said. So having a bit of doubt still, but he's now asking for a bit more of a physical sign in our life, in his life. This is where we get the sort of saying of putting out a fleece to the Lord when you're at a sort of bit of a crossroad in your life and you're not sure where to go. This is the one of the best examples of sort of how to get that answer from the Lord. Now, I don't know of anyone who actually has physically put out a fleece and gained a sign from the Lord. Maybe somewhere someone has done it, and I'm sure the Lord's followed through in some way, but it's more so just a bit of a clearer sign to where you need to be. Verse 38, and it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow and thrust the fleece together and wringed the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. So straight away the Lord provided. But in verse 39, and Gideon said unto God, let not thine anger be hot against thee, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. So the Lord has provided a clear sign to Gideon, and yet he's still doubting, and he's wanting more. And he's wanting a clearer sign again that it's definitely the right path. And we can definitely be like that. We're all human, whether it be for the same situation or a new situation. We ask for multiple things to sort of fall in line. And I sort of, excuse me, I like how Gideon sort of says, like, don't be angry with me, Lord, like, don't sort of cast me down or whatever, but I just need another sign. And we can definitely be like that sometimes. But in verse 40, we see here, and God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. So no form of anger or anything from the Lord, just a clear sign that it was definitely meant to be from him. And we know the rest of the story, how Gideon even was then given sort of a naturally bad hand, I guess you could say, with all the people, being lesson and lesson in his army, but he still had faith in the Lord. But I guess, the Lord definitely proves himself to you if you reach out and put out that fleece. That's the thing as well. It is, actual an action, to actually do something and ask for clarity. No matter what financial situation or social status or job that we have, the Lord still can definitely work and provide clarity and provide clarity on what your role is in your fellowship or your life. We'll go to Matthew 11 now. I guess if we ever are in a time of doubt, or I guess, I don't know, a bit aimless, we feel like, our role maybe is a bit pointless, or going unseen, it can be easy to maybe think that, the Lord's not listening to your call, you're not being used properly, or maybe you feel like the Lord's punishing you. I don't know. But if we read in Matthew 11 and verse 28, it says, "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and lean on me, and learn on me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This sort of thought actually came from a few of the gifts recently that I've heard, sort of in regards to the burden of life, and potentially the burden of feeling that doubt of not having, being in the right spot, or, not having your purpose. That burden is not from the Lord. The Lord's burden is light, and his yoke is easy. So we got to remember that if we are feeling that sort of burden and the pull down of the doubt of whether we are having purpose or not, we got to remember that that's not from the Lord. That's our natural mind, and we can go to the Lord and receive the opposite, receive a burden that is light, and a role that is easy, and yoke that is easy. We'll go to 2 Timothy chapter 1. First Timothy, 2 Timothy. One of my favorite scriptures here, verse 7. "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind." Everyone should have that highlighted, or at least know it. It's a very good one. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. If we ever feel that we are in a time of doubt, or maybe not feeling the most useful, or maybe even we're feeling worthless in our role in the church, go to the Lord. He will give you a burden that is light, and a yoke that's easy, a role that he knows that you can fulfill. And he knows, like I said right at the start, the Lord knows why you're here. He's put you here. He knew you before you were even a thought from your parents and your grandparents and their parents and before that. So he knows how you'll act in situations. He'll know how you'll act in a role, and he's put you in that role specifically. If you feel like maybe you're not understanding your role or your purpose in the fellowship, put out a fleece. Ask the Lord for a bit of clarity on what is your role. Am I really meant to be in this spot, and I guarantee he'll come through. And just as we read there, the Lord's given us the Spirit. If you're Spirit filled, the Lord's given us a spirit of power and of love and of sound mind, not of fear or doubt. So just use that Spirit, and he'll show you your purpose. Amen.
Amen.
All right, do a little dance break. Yes. All right, thanks, Ollie. Yeah, we're to be confident in the Lord, aren't we? He has a plan and purpose for us, so we can come to Him when we're doubting and need wisdom. Praise the Lord. All right, we'll hand straight over to Colin for the second talk. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, James. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here again. Been a short visit, but it's always good to be here. So wonderful. So if Ollie can call his talk, what was it? Doubting Schmounting?
Yeah.
I'm going to call this Boo-hoo, It's Not Fair. Matthew chapter 24, for starters. We live in this society now where things like social justice and equality is, pushed and all that sort of stuff. And yet at the same time, going on around us in the world are some of the biggest acts of hatred and inequality and unfairness and all that you can see. I mean, we've had in recent times, things like ethnic cleansing and, the civil conflict in the US, and now we've got, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine thing going on, and we've had, Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria with the mess that is and all this sort of stuff. And it's just all these groups of people that just hate each other. And I'm not going to get into any of the politics and why all this happens and so on, but there's this underlying hatred, and there's some really horrible things happening to people out there. And for many of those people, it is simply not fair. Most of them are probably just average civilians and, get caught up in it and all that sort of stuff. But if we go to Matthew chapter 24, and of course, this is the famous chapter about Jesus talking about the last days. And verse 9, it says, "Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for not my name's sake. And then shall many be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." And this is Jesus talking here about the times in which we live. And it doesn't sound very nice, particularly a lot of that may well be pointed at us. And these are things that operate on a personal level. And of course, when things happen to you personally that might not be fair, you might get, victimized at work, or you might have a very unfortunate accident, or, whatever it might be. You might have family members turn against you and so on. It's really easy just to go, "Oh, woe is me, boo-hoo, it's not fair," right? But the first thing we must always remember is that God is not ignorant, and He's not ignorant of our circumstances in which we find ourselves. He's not ignorant of our natural human nature and how we feel about things. He's not ignorant of our emotions. And that may well be some fear, it might be some uncertainty or pain or whatever it is. Now, I'm just going to quote this for the sake of time in Luke 12, where Jesus says, "But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows." And so we're reminded here that we are actually valued by the Lord. And as we get closer to the last of the last days, if you like, we may well face many personal challenges, and but that doesn't mean that God is unaware or uncaring about our life. And I was reminded the other day, someone at Woodcroft gave the talk about the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, where Joseph was unfairly accused. And he was imprisoned for quite a number of years. And then when he thought he had his sort of ticket out, he got betrayed again by the chief butler. You can read all about it. It's Genesis chapter 39 and 40. Haven't got time now. But it was quite a number of years where Joseph was sat in the jail there, and he could well have tossed his arms in the air and go, oh, you know, God's forgotten me. What's it all worth? You know, I might as well curl up and die, sort of thing. And yet the Lord restored him in the end. And the Lord restored him to, you know, one of the head honchos in Egypt. And he ended up being in the privileged position of being able to save his family from famine. And that's a whole other story and everything. But, you know, it's a very good illustration of how the Lord is not ignorant and the Lord restores, even though we might suffer a little bit for a while. Now, over in Acts chapter 7, if you turn there, in the end of Acts chapter 7, we read about this guy called Stephen. And many of you would be aware that he actually signed up to wait on tables and look after the widows and whatnot, and ended up getting stoned for the privilege. And I don't mean in a spaced out way, I mean in a chuck rocks at him sort of way. So in verse 54, and this is when the anger is building, right, before the actual rocks start flying. And when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. But he, that's Stephen, being full of the Holy Ghost, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing on the right hand of God. And he said, behold, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. Now, he was already in a pretty nasty predicament here, and he could see that this was going south at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And what did he do? He looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of God, right? And then if you read on in verse 57, they cried out with a loud voice, and they stopped with their ears, and they ran upon him with one accord, cast him out of the city, and they stoned him, and so on it goes. And so this was the end of poor old Stephen. And right in verse 60, and he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he said this, he fell asleep. So how can this guy who, you know, signed up to wait on tables, how can he ignore the rocks pelting down around him and still see the glory of God and still not be vindictive or hateful towards the people that were chucking the rocks? You know, he says, Lord, lay not the sin to the charge. And, you know, you think about Joseph and Potiphar. Well, you know, how is it that Joseph didn't spit the dummy? You know, in our natural mind, how can we see the glory of God when things aren't going well in a natural sense? And of course, the answer is it depends where our focus is, right? If we go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 7, we see, of course, this is written by the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, you know, he's a great one to do a bit of a Bible study and to read through the book of Acts about his adventures and sometimes misadventures in many ways. And get out your book of Acts. You know, you can get the, you know, the timeline, the 30 years from the start to the finish of book of Acts, and then see when his epistles were written. And you read the bit of the history about what happened, and then you go read the epistles he's written. And then you go back and read the next bit of history and go back and read the next epistle and everything. It really gives you an insight into how this guy thought. But 2 Corinthians 7 in verse 4, he's talking to the Corinthian church here. Great is my boldness of speech toward you. Great is my glorying of you. I am filled with comfort. I am exceeding joyful in all our tribulation. 2 Corinthians 11, he gives a bit of a summary of his tribulation, which is quite a list. And in verse 5, he says, for when we were coming to Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, so the natural side of things, but we were troubled on every side. And when he says every side, you immediately think, oh, there's things coming at to him from the left and the right and all this sort of stuff. But he actually says here, without were fightings and within were fears, right? So he's got all the natural stuff going on around him, you know, conflict and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But within, he's got these fears. And, so there's no doubt there were the physical difficulties, but if you look at his life and the things he's faced, it's understandable in a natural sense that he might have anxiety and uncertainty, and he says that he had concern for the churches above everything else, and so he's got this physical pain probably and this mental anguish, and yet he talks about exceeding joyful in our tribulation. He was happy. And so what was Paul doing that dominated over all of the conflict and the pain within and all that sort of stuff? Well, he was doing the Lord's work, and he was spreading the gospel. He was helping the young churches that were around about get established, ministering to their needs, helping them through with various issues that they faced about doctrine and practical things and all that sort of stuff. And above all, he has this focus on the big picture of where the end game is for him, to be at one with the Lord in the end, rather than his individual issues. And I guess we can, you look at him as a role model, and I don't think none of us are ever going to suffer that level of persecution and distress. But I tell you what, the things that happen to us, if we can model ourselves on how he reacted and do likewise, we will be at peace within ourselves. And, if we choose to focus our thoughts and our efforts, our actions and so on the good things in the Lord, that exceeding joy that he talks about will be ours as well. And you can have a lot of joy through tribulation. And I know that from myself. And so anything, the worst thing that might happen to you in your life, God can make something good come out of anything. And, Ollie just talked about Gideon and so on, where he ended up with 300 guys up against a massive army, and yet the Lord found a way for him to be victorious. And it will always be that way with us. And, the other thing is the effect on our brothers and sisters, because someone out there or in here or whatever it is will see your strength and will see the Holy Spirit working in your life. Despite the natural, they'll see your faith, your patience, your endurance, and so on, and that is very inspiring to others. And quite often, I've heard testimonies of new people coming to the Lord because they've seen a saint suffer something terrible and yet still rejoice through it, and it's made people think. And so, God can make good things come out of anything. Verse 6, he says, "Nevertheless, God, that comforted those that are cast down, comforted us by the coming of Titus." So it was great to see Titus again, and so he rejoiced in that. And not by his coming only, but by the consolation wherewith he was comforted, when you told us your earnest desire, your mourning, your fervent mind toward me, so that I rejoiced the more, even more. And so great example here that really enforces how a brother or sister can be a great encouragement or inspiration. And it's not just someone stands up here and gives a testimony like Lily did earlier, but also just in your everyday fellowship and things like that, talking to one another. It's amazing how those things that the Lord delivers can be inspiring. We should always seek comfort in the Lord and his saints, and not wallow in our misery. I guess a final thing to finish up on is a common mistake that people make in their walk in the Lord is when things go tough, they withdraw and they pull back on themselves and they go, I'm struggling with this tribulation at the moment. I won't go to the meeting, or I won't, whatever it is, sort of thing. And it all comes inward. Whereas, what the Lord is asking us to do is take comfort in the saints, take comfort in the testimonies and be inspired by them. And if you're in that situation where you feel like pulling back and withdrawing, no, go and seek the comfort and the support of the saints, because I tell you what, it's there. And, sometimes people don't know, and you only got to say something, and the saints are absolutely wonderful when it comes to those sort of things. So, is life fair? No. But not always, right? But for us to go, boo-hoo, it's not fair, is probably not what the Lord wants us to do. He rather wants us to rejoice in whatever, and the Lord will see us through, and the Lord will give us the victory. I'll leave it there. Amen. And James.